In-depth movie highlights here. Tapping in with another one. Make sure to like and sub. The movie begins in a hospital in London, where hundreds of patients are being treated. It's a normal sunny day and everything appears to be fine. But suddenly, something strange begins to happen. A dark cloud appears over the building and rainwater starts getting sucked into it. The very next second, a massive earthquake hits, leaving all the people inside the hospital terrified. After a while, when the situation calms down, people rush to the windows to check the devastation, only to find the Earth in the distance. Somehow, they have been transported to the moon. Following this, the movie flashes back to a few hours earlier. We are introduced to the protagonist, Martha Jones, who is heading to the same hospital. It turns out that it's her brother's 21st birthday and also that her parents are divorced. As she is walking, Martha gets calls from all members of her family debating whether or not her dad should bring his new girlfriend to the birthday party. Exhausted with all her family members, she hangs up and suddenly runs into a strange man who takes off his tie in front of her and continues walking. Martha assumes the man is drunk and doesn't think much of it. After a while, she reaches the Royal Hope Hospital, where she is doing her internship under the supervision of the head doctor, Mr. Stoker. Later, as Martha changes into her hospital gown and tries to close her locker, she gets suddenly zapped. But even this time, she doesn't pay any regard to it and leaves for her classes. An hour later, Mr. Stoker is seen with several medical students, including Martha. They are checking on an old lady named Florence Finnegan, who apparently is feeling very dizzy. Mr. Stoker asks the students to suggest what it might be and all of them give her complex diagnoses. Martha is also given a chance, but her answers are way out of context. At last, Mr. Stoker asks Ms. Finnegan about her recent diet and concludes that her dizziness is simply because of a salt deficiency. Mr. Stoker then goes on to the next patient, who is revealed to be the strange man that Martha had bumped into earlier. His name is John Smith and he has been admitted apparently because of a stomach ache. But when Martha goes to listen in with a stethoscope, she is shocked. She unexplainably finds that John has two hearts. As Mr. Stoker checks his file report, he also experiences the same electrical shock that Martha had. Strangely, each of the students had experienced it as well. Mr. Stoker then says that it is because of the approaching thunderstorm and static electricity. The scene cuts to the lunch break where Martha is talking to her sister on the phone. They are planning to meet in 10 minutes. But strangely, her sister, who is walking towards the hospital building, notices that there is a solitary dark cloud above the hospital. Only that part is experiencing rain, while the rest of the city is sunny. Shortly after, Martha realizes that the rain is actually moving upwards. All of a sudden, the building begins to shake violently, causing her to fall to the ground. Following the earthquake-like experience, Martha gets up and sees something shocking. Outside, it has already become night, despite it being noon just a minute ago. As she looks through the window in disbelief, she shockingly notices the earth. This is when Martha realizes that the entire hospital has actually been transported to the moon along with all of its staff and patients. As chaos and panic engulfs the building, Martha begins to question how they are breathing oxygen if they are in space. Just then, the patient with two hearts from earlier, John, approaches her and starts examining the place. Shortly after, he invites Martha to venture outside, onto the veranda to check if they can breathe. Martha confidently agrees, and when they step outside, they are still able to breathe. Assuming that a force field is keeping them alive, John throws a rock outside and finds that his suspicions were true. They have been encircled by a tiny invisible field, which is filled with oxygen. However, the problem is that with nearly 1,000 people inside the hospital building, the oxygen supply will soon run out. After saying all this, John reveals that his real name is actually the Doctor. He is a supernatural being from another planet who had come to the hospital to investigate the sudden rise in static charges. These are the same charges that had been zapping the hospital employees. Suddenly, 3 enormous spaceships come roaring down and land in front of them. Then several hundred aliens come out and begin marching towards the hospital in ordered lines. The Doctor, who is watching from afar, identifies them as a species called the Judoons. Meanwhile, the old patient, Ms. Finnegan, enters Mr. Stoker's office, looking for help. The latter says that he is in no condition to offer any sort of aid, but the old lady is not going to leave so easily. Instead, she summons 2 creepy men wearing black helmets and orders them to restrain Mr. Stoker. Ms. Finnegan then reveals that she needs his blood and pulls out a straw. In the meantime, the Judoons have infiltrated the hospital with full force. One of them takes off his headgear, revealing his alien face, which strongly resembles a 2-horned rhino. He speaks in a foreign language which the humans can't seem to comprehend. Hence, the Judoon pins one of the doctors against the wall, uses a device to record his voice and then inserts it into his alien suit. With this, he assimilates the English language and starts talking in it. Following this, he orders the other Judoons to catalog all the suspects in an attempt to find the non-human criminal. In no time, the procedure starts. The Judoons point a different device at the patients and staff, and if they pass the test, an X is marked on their hands. This will indicate that they are really humans. Elsewhere, the doctor explains to Martha that the Judoons are an intergalactic police force, and that they are searching for a species other than humans. This is the reason for the static charges, as the Judoons were building a black hole large enough to teleport the hospital to the moon. And since the doctor is an alien, he will get terminated if the Judoons scan him. Hence, he and Martha quietly escape the floor. In the meantime, the Judoons slowly make their way up the hospital and continue cataloging humans. One man decides to take matters into his own hands and attacks a Judoon, but he is quickly terminated with a laser. On the other hand, the doctor goes through the hospital's computer files at an insane speed using his device, which he calls a sonic screwdriver. He explains that he is looking through each of the patient's records to find the actual culprit that the Judoons are looking for. Martha inquires what will happen if they find the alien themselves, to which the doctor replies that the Judoons will most likely execute all people within the hospital on grounds of harboring a fugitive. Suddenly, the computer shuts down and it appears as if the Judoons have taken over the entire mainframe. The doctor then tells Martha that any information about patients with unusual symptoms over the last week would be helpful. Hence, she heads over to Mr. Stoker's office to ask him about it. To her horror, she witnesses the old lady, Ms. Finnegan, sucking the blood out of him via a straw. Martha immediately runs for her life while one of the men in black chases her through the corridors. She returns to the doctor and the two take off. After a bit of running, they enter an X-ray room, whose door the doctor seals off with his sonic screwdriver. Shortly after, the man in black finds them inside and tries to break the door down. With time running out, the doctor comes up with a plan. He orders Martha to press the correct button as he takes the X-ray machine and points it towards the door. After a while, the man eventually breaks in and Martha immediately presses a button, emitting radiation which was increased to 5,000% with the help of his sonic screwdriver. This insane amount of radiation kills the man instantly, but the doctor doesn't seem to be affected at all. Afterwards, Martha finally gets a chance to inform him about Ms. Finnegan. The doctor realizes that the old lady is a Plasmavore, an alien with the ability to transform into the species whose blood it consumes. Elsewhere, as Miss Finnegan has sucked Mr. Stoker's blood, she appears to be human when scanned by the Judoons. Meanwhile, as the doctor along with Martha comes out of her room, a Judoon quickly scans him and deems him as non-human. Alarmed, the two make a run for it while the Judoons assume that he is the Plasmavore and chase after him. Fortunately, they manage to lose the Judoons, and shortly after, Martha runs into one of her colleagues. She seems fatigued and weak as the oxygen has depleted a lot and only a small amount is remaining. The doctor then reveals that the Judoons have a larger lung capacity, so it is not going to slow them down. In the next scene, the two finally enter Mr. Stoker's office, where they find his pale body on the floor. It is apparent that Ms. Finnegan sucked every last drop out of him. Before the two leave, Martha shuts Mr. Stoker's eyes out of respect. The doctor then begins to think where the Plasmavore might be and decides to check the MRI room. At the same time, the Judoons also spot them, so the doctor asks Martha to stay behind and hold them off. He then unexpectedly kisses her before running off, making her blush. Soon, the Judoons approach Martha and proceed to scan her. The scanner identifies her as a human but with traces of non-human DNA. This is because she was kissed by an alien minutes ago. Alarmed, the Judoons conduct more tests on her, hence buying the doctor some more time. After she is given the all-clear, Martha tries to explain that Ms. Finnegan is the alien that they are looking for, but the Judoons completely ignore her and leave. Meanwhile, the doctor heads into the magnetic resonance imaging, MRI, room and finds Ms. Finnegan fiddling around with the technology in there. He then decides to pretend as if he is a confused human and babbles on about the Judoons and how they are on the moon. Ms. Finnegan does seem convinced, but nonetheless, she orders her remaining henchmen to restrain the doctor. This is when she reveals her plan that she is modifying the scanner to make it destroy all life on the moon as well as the entire half of the Earth which is currently facing it. Ms. Finnegan also admits that she is the alien that the Judoons are looking for. In response, the doctor lies that the Judoons are changing their scanners to a higher setting for more accurate results. This scares Ms. Finnegan, thinking that she might get caught. Hence, she decides to suck the doctor's blood in order to appear more human. Wasting no time, she inserts the straw into the doctor's neck and begins to draw all the blood out of him. When the Judoons and Martha finally enter the room, the doctor's body has already become pale and he collapses to the ground. Devastated, Martha accuses Ms. Finnegan of murder and explains to the Judoons that she is in fact the Plasmavore. However, the Judoons ignore her and scan the doctor's body. When the result says deceased, they assume that their work is done and proceed to leave. Suddenly, Martha realizes that it was all the doctor's plan. He deliberately let Ms. Finnegan suck his alien blood, so that she can be classified as a non-human. To prove it, Martha snatches a scanner out of one of the Judoons and scans Ms. Finnegan. As expected, it shows that she is a non-human, and also identifies her as a Plasmavore. The Judoons ultimately kill her, but before that, she manages to activate the machine. In no time, gigantic surges of electric volts are seen in the MRI equipment. The Judoons, however, return to their ships as their work is now done and have no further business in the hospital. Martha begs for their help, but to no avail. Now, in an attempt to save the doctor, Martha uses cardiopulmonary resuscitation, CPR, on both of his hearts. As the oxygen is low, she uses her last breath and finally saves the doctor, but in the process, she passes out. After the doctor wakes up, he immediately gets to work and manages to disable the modified MRI machine, saving countless lives. He then carries Martha downstairs and waits for the Judoons to reverse the transportation back to Earth before everyone dies from oxygen deprivation. Luckily, the Judoons reverse it in the nick of time, and with a bright flash of light, the hospital returns back to Earth in its original place. Several paramedics and ambulances are on K, and shortly after, Martha wakes up. As she talks with her sister, she notices the doctor leaving the place. The same evening, as Martha attends her brother's birthday party, a fight ensues between her family members. One by one, everyone leaves, leaving only Martha behind. Surprisingly, she sees the doctor around the corner of the block, who smiles at her and leaves. Martha follows him and finds him leaning on a big blue telephone box. He invites her on a trip with him, but she hesitates. The doctor then reveals that he can travel through time as well with the help of the telephone box. She doesn't believe him, so the doctor enters the telephone box and it slowly vanishes into thin air, leaving Martha speechless. After a while, the box reappears and the doctor emerges with his tie in hand. This indicates that the doctor went back in time to this morning when Martha encountered him on the street. He had taken off his tie at that instance. Martha cannot comprehend how all of this is possible and decides to go with him. She then questions the doctor about the box and how cramped it will be time traveling together. The doctor says that the box is called TARDIS, which stands for time and relative dimensions in space. It's then revealed that the inside of the box is much bigger than on the outside. Martha is left in utter disbelief by what she sees, but nonetheless, she is ready to go on a trip with him. The movie ends as the doctor starts the TARDIS and initiates a new journey. Don't forget to like and sub.